It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Hey, g'day listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 75, where we look at all matters Australian politics and media, and move on to have a good look around the world. And joining me as usual is Hong Kong Jack, all the way in Hong Kong. G'day, mate. How are you?
I'm excellent.
There you go. Now, we've got a big show to get through, including some listener comments, so we want to get on with those. But Accent Research and Redbridge MRP provided a full report, basically analysis of a lot of polling that they've done. They say that there's a 50% chance of a Labor minority government and a 50% chance of a Labor majority government, and a zero chance for either scenario for the LNP. That's the headline figure. Labor losing a few primary votes, particularly in the outer suburbs and regional centres, while the coalition has gained a small primary vote swings across most areas except in rural electorates. I have to say first up, polling until the tax cuts hit on July 1 is going to be basically not a lot of point to it. We'll get a better feel for how the government's going after those tax cuts bed down. So you're looking at August, September before you can make a proper analysis of where we are. I'd expect Labor's numbers to jump. Newspoll has Labor's primary vote at 1.5% above its, not primary vote, it's two-party preferred, 1.5% ahead of its 2022 federal election results. Jack, no surprises in this really, are there?
I just like to say that there is a point in doing lots of polling. You get paid for it.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's right. And all the results, you deal with this gravity, all this sort of nonsense. That, it really is fish and chip wrapper. A week down the line, we can obsess about these things. I honestly don't think there's much point in looking at polling and heavy analysis at this particular point in the electoral cycle. Notwithstanding, notwithstanding, but we have to remember that there are significant tax cuts coming into the electorate as of July 1, and we'll have a better feel for it then. Zero chance for the LNP, Jack.
The point to it is that it gives you a kind of every now and again gives you a picture of how things are going. So I think it's worthwhile. But yeah, is it overdone? Probably, yeah. Yeah,
I think there are. One or two. I was actually having a look through the US polling companies because there was a company that I hadn't heard of before. And, of course, 538 have a list of over 200 polling companies in the United States. And this one didn't appear on it, Jack. The Cook Political Report. I said, I've never really heard of that before. Doesn't appear on 538 at all. So there are over, presumably about 300 or 400 polling companies in the US. We've got a good deal less. But they have to do something, Jack, don't they?
They do.
They do.
Have shareholders. They have shareholders report.
Let's get back to the headline thing. Zero chance of an LNP win, even minority government, Jack.
Which is what you would expect. There hasn't been
zero chance in terms of probabilities.
I don't recall
none whatsoever.
I don't recall in my lifetime an opposition, a leader who took the job as opposition leader after a defeat ever becoming Prime Minister. There hasn't been.
No, it's never happened before. But
that's
not to say you got zero chance when it comes to polling day, whenever that may be.
Well, I think it pretty much that's a distinction without a difference. I didn't expect Peter Dutton to become Prime Minister when he took the job. That almost guarantees that you won't become Prime Minister.
All right, so they got zero chance of being elected, Jack.
So his job, which I think he's doing quite well, his job was to make them at least competitive, and they are competitive.
I think they're a bit. Well, they're not competitive if they got zero chance of winning, Jack.
Well,
that's
a snapshot as of May 2024. But I don't think the government thinks they've got zero chance of losing.
No, I think it's a ridiculous sort of headline figure, but they're about to release with trepidation. You can only imagine the trepidation. They're about to release a nuclear policy, and that it would seem to be a fairly significant act of self-harm, I would think, once it goes in the electorate, because one of the things they have to do is say, this is where we're going to put a large-scale reactor, right? This is where we're going to put small modular reactors. They've indicated they're going to do both, and now they're going to have to say where they're coming from. They're saying that it's all going to be funded by private investment, which will be amusing in itself to see the big lenders see what they have to say about the policy. But in Gippsland, for example, one thing that we sort of have a feeling about is that there will be a large-scale reactor built at your lawn. Hello, Darren Chester, member for Gippsland. Have you been consulted on this? I mean, how it will change the dynamics of an electorate, particularly where you go large-scale nuclear reactor. It'll change the dynamics of the electorate significantly.
Well, we'll have to, just like with the tax cuts, we'll have to wait and see on that. I would say you look at the two leaders, the Prime Minister and Peter Dutton, whose party thinks they're going better at the moment? I'd say the Liberal Party probably think Peter Dutton's going better than the Labor Party think Anthony Albanese is going.
While they've suffered a loss, while they've suffered a loss in the two-party preferred.
Yep,
they're further behind now than they were at the election.
Yeah, my feeling is that
that's a win, is it?
No, I think there's a discontent within the Labor ranks about the Prime Minister, and I think there is an appreciation within the Liberal ranks.
Who have you spoken to there to get that view from within the Labor Party?
Just a bit of gossip around the place.
Yeah. They would have to be lunatics to do what they did in 2010. So that's not going to happen. I think
there's no suggestion of that. What I'm saying is, I think there's people who think he's made some errors. He's not really going as well as they thought he might be.
Yeah. Okay. So they are 1.5 points ahead on Newspoll as to what they were in the federal election. Again, we've got tax cuts coming, significant tax cuts for a great chunk of Middle Australia, and then the Liberal Party's got to unroll a nuclear policy, which I think even some of the smart Conservatives around the place think is going to be a grave act of political self-harm.
Yeah, well, we'll have a look in September when you get back from the UK.
Well, yes, we certainly will be looking at it. But there are so many holes, so many reasons to knock this down. This is a conversation Australians really didn't want to have, and it's been essentially sort of foisted on the Australian people, and now it's been foisted on the Liberal Party. That you sense the nervousness about the release of this policy, and if there's been no community consultation, for example, in Gippsland, where they announce there's going to be a large-scale nuclear reactor, I mean, it could potentially be disastrous. What sort of community consultation have they had? These sorts of things. How are the major lenders going to get behind it? Are they going to get behind it? And if they say no, then the whole thing falls over. And it's an embarrassing, humiliating disgrace before the next election. So we'll see how that all goes, but I can smell their fear about this, and they are locked into it now, and they can't walk away from it. Are we a racist country, Jack? You don't think so. I know your views on this, but Laura Tingle at Sydney's Carriage Works at Redfern Way on a panel there. Laura Tingle accused Peter Dutton of encouraging racism towards migrants looking to buy or rent property in Australia. We are a racist country, let's face it, she said. We always have been, and it's very depressing. And then Tanya Plibersek came out and said, no, we're not racist at all. So are we racist? Are we a little bit racist, or are we not racist at all?
I think every country has a degree of racism in it, because that's sort of hard baked into people, that they have a preference for their own. But Australia, comparatively speaking, is far from being a racist country. I mean, if you think Australia is a terribly racist country, you really need to travel more.
I think we are a very successful example of multiculturalism and immigration. Compared to, let's say, some of the tensions that exist in Europe to this day around immigration.
It's notable if you look at who are the successful countries at integrating other races and cultures, the successful multicultural countries. They're all from, they all had antecedents in the United Kingdom. So they are Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. They're the countries that successfully integrate people.
Yeah, and there's different
reasons. And I spent 15 years living in Asia, and the sort of, you can't say that casual racism that we haven't heard in Australia for 30 years is commonplace still up here.
Yeah. Okay. I tend to agree with
plus
that.
The real racism of discrimination against people is still extant today. In Hong Kong's one of the better places in Asia, but even here there is discrimination against South Asians, say.
Discrimination? What are you talking about? Government discrimination? So that's the issue, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're not talking about casual racism and a view of one group of people towards another. We're talking about, the sort of thing that could bring around a sort of discrimination in public policy.
There's a little bit of that and a lot of popular discrimination against South Asians.
All right, that takes us over. Well, I didn't want to leave the Laura Tingle comments just there, Jack, because
this was the Sydney
once
Writers'
she
Festival.
said these things, she's a board member of the ABC, of course. She is the employees' representative on the board there. I think it really makes it very difficult for her to be able to report on politics going forward, particularly around an election.
Her role as a senior political reporter and a board member, I don't think they're tenable.
I can't see it either. She's basically given Labor and Anthony Albanese a big boost. I mean, through her comments. I mean, perhaps not boost is the right word, but she certainly distinguished herself as a person who would prefer to support Anthony Albanese and the Labor government as opposed to Peter Dutton and the coalition. And I find that, I think that she's got a difficulty there going forward.
Well, there's a difficulty with her publicly stated positions and holding the position of senior political correspondent, for starters. But that's a problem, I think. But the board position is just untenable.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. It's very likely that. Well, there is talk in the Australian today that there will be a board meeting, which I think was due in July. You'd reckon they'd meet a little bit more regularly than that, Jack, wouldn't you?
What are the fees?
Every couple of months, maybe there's not enough quid in it for them to do it. But there is some talk that they will move that forward to discuss those comments. I mean, we understand that people can sit on a panel in front of a small audience of people. And
this is the Sydney Writers' Festival. Would be a big audience of people, wouldn't it?
Oh, well, Carriage Works, mate. It's a lovely place, but there'd only be a couple of hundred there. And I think Barry was there. there were a number of others. There was the Guardian journalist. It was a Guardian journalist, but
there might have been something in the morning coffee, because the Guardian journalist went a bit nuts as well.
Well, that's okay. People are entitled to have their opinions, but the problem with Laura Tingle is that she's got a very senior role at the ABC, and also she's a member of the board. So you consider her position there untenable. I tend to agree, so it's one of those things where you should keep your own counsel. I think these sort of panel shows in front of a couple of hundred people, there are always others listening, and it's not a good look, I don't think.
But there's always a temptation, even with a couple of hundred people, to chase the good wishes and applause of the audience.
Yeah, look, one thing I would say is that and it's one of those issues that I want to look at. It certainly shouldn't be the case that we look at reporting as always having to tell us both sides of the story, because that's a nonsense, particularly when you're dealing with misinformation. You can't do the both sides of the argument stuff. But when it comes to Australian party politics, you certainly have to appear unbiased, and she hasn't done that.
Look at the great political reporters in our history. Look at Laurie Oakes. It was hard to say with certainty how Laurie was voting.
You reckon?
Yeah, I think he's probably a Labor person, but you couldn't be sure. He was quite prepared to stick it up.
I follow Laurie pretty closely, mate. I think I'd have a fair idea where he votes.
He was quite prepared to stick it up people from both sides of politics.
Yeah, that's the thing. You've got to be able to do that. And Laura Tingle has done that in the past, but this is a little bit different, shall we say. She's really turned on Peter Dutton. We said Australia is a successful multicultural country, Jack, successful immigrant nation. We have this thing called Direction 99. I'm going to let you lead the way on this. Direction 99, what is it and how has it been, shall we say, misused?
It's a ministerial direction that the Minister for Immigration, Andrew Giles, has given to the department and also to the federal AAT as to how to deal with these cases, and it's just a bit soft. What it does is places a lot of emphasis on. It's to do with keeping people who otherwise might be deported under the character test, and it gives some nuance to the character test, if I'm going to be kind, and it asks the tribunal to give more consideration to whether they've got long ties in the country, etc. And this has led to some what you'd only really describe as unfortunate results. There's people who've committed serious and nasty crimes.
There's a trio of rapists on the Giles leniency list, Jack.
Yeah, and it's just a reinforcement that the government made a mistake in appointing Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles to those two positions. That they
they're both inexperienced. Neither have been ministers before. I noticed that there was a mention here of the fact that had the Queensland MP won her seat, Brisbane-based,
Terry Butler.
Yeah, Terry Butler would have probably got the gong on Home Affairs. She has ministerial experience, but Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles don't. It seems to me that we've been talking about Andrew Giles for a long time, and he must be the bane of Albo's existence at the moment. They're very reluctant to he'd be very reluctant to move on the immigration leader, but the immigration minister, I should say. But it's getting to that point where something needs to be done.
He's a factional ally of the Prime Minister's, which is probably protecting him, it may well be protecting him at the moment. But, he's a Scotch college boy, Melbourne law, holding Redleck, Slater and Gordon. You sort of wonder whether he's had enough contact with the kind of broader community.
Well, that's the problem with politicians generally, isn't it, Jack?
But
you're right. I mean, he's a socialist left factional convener in Victoria. If I looked at what I know of his background, I'd say he should be a fair way away from the cabinet.
Well, he's not in cabinet. He's a junior minister, but yeah,
immigration's not in cabinet.
No, Claire O'Neill's in the cabinet.
Home Affairs is, of course.
Yeah, Home Affairs is, yes.
I did not know that. I thought immigration was a senior ministry and off you go. You're into cabinet, but no, he's a junior minister.
That was pre the Home Affairs ministry. I think was my recollection. Yeah. I might be wrong, but I think that's
that's fine. I actually think you're right, but he just seems to be a plus.
The Home Affairs Minister has oversight of the Immigration Department as well as part of her.
So, what actually happens when we use something like Direction 99, Jack? Is it basically a piece of paper gets shoved onto the Immigration Minister's desk and say, are you going to approve this guy or are we going to deport him? Is it as simple as that?
Well, no, it's a general direction that applies to all the cases. So somewhere in the department or from the minister's office, they came up with this idea that we will do a direction, a ministerial direction.
That covers a number of individuals, not just one, two, or three.
No, not just one person at all. No. I just love that it's called Direction 99. It's like
it just sounds very Orwellian, doesn't it? Direction 99.
Or it sounds like. It sounds like it comes out of a John le Carre novel. Why are we doing this? Direction 99.
I've got the Ministry of Truth coming up with Direction number 99. It does very much smell of Orwellian sort of diktats, but
he's probably a bit young Andrew Giles, but perhaps Consul General somewhere or another job.
Another job, you reckon? Being in the SL means Albo will be fairly close to him.
Yeah, immigration's a hard ministry in the sense that you need someone in there who's a little bit hard-nosed.
Yeah.
You can't have a neophyte, inexperienced chap or woman in there because you've got to take account of what the broader country will stand for. You can say we want to be a welcoming immigration country and good multicultural, citizens, all that sort of thing. But you've got to balance all of that, and that takes a bit of political experience and skill to pull it off.
So let's say the file lands on the immigration minister's desk, and there are a number of people there who are facing deportation, Jack, and it's Executive Rule number 99 is used to basically reissue visas. Is that correct?
No. These were done at the AAT, but on the basis of the ministerial direction. So this wasn't done on a case by case basis. If it had been done on a case by case basis, he'd be out of a job today. But this is let's set the broad policy, and we think we've been too tough on these people in deporting them. So let's narrow it down. Let's give some more restrictions as to how the law is applied, so that more of these people can start.
Why wouldn't the minister be looking at this on a case by case basis, Jack?
Well, the minister can.
That's what I mean. If you're allowing rapists and other people, and we've seen a few others who can't be deported for legal reasons, going out and committing a wide range of offences in the community. I think there's a very strong community expectation that these people don't belong here or should be incarcerated. High Court disagrees, of course, which is part of the problem. But
Well, I think to be fair, I think the High Court's going to say if there's no expectation that you can be that you can be deported, you shouldn't be held in detention. But their last case suggested that if you are preventing that by not cooperating, you will be detained.
Yeah, well, that's where we are now. Look, bit of a disaster, I would think. I think immigration generally is going to be a fairly hot issue in the election. And maybe it's time to do a bit of housekeeping there, Jack. Ping Mr. Giles and replace him.
Well, immigration is a hot issue in elections all around the world, all around the Western world, and Australia will be. Despite the fact that we're very successful, it will still be an issue here, and they're going to need, I think, someone better than Andrew Giles to run the show.
Fair point. All right, matters arising, and we heard from one of our favourite farmers, cattle farmer, Lawrence, who has a bit of feedback for us. He talks about how his children, his 4 daughters, have all graduated from university, and goes on to say, it's a bit rich to hear a couple of older gentlemen, that's you and I, from a generation where university was free and you could also qualify for further fortnightly assistance through T's. Never did that. Don't know why. Bemoaning the government easing the debt burden on current graduates. Far from forgiving debt, this is the point that Lawrence makes well, and I might have fallen into the issue of forgiving debt, and I think you might have too. They've just reduced the interest rate, Jack. So it's not as if they're wiping debt clear, and I think that was perhaps a mistake that I might have made last week. So point well made, Lawrence. They've reduced the interest rate for the HECS payments. Then we come to protests. God forbid, Lawrence says, that university campuses have some naive idealists or worse, still a few radicals. What do we want? Have them checking their investments or Bitcoin accounts. I mean, Rupert Murdoch was the secretary of the Young Labor Party at Oxford and was reputed to have a bust of Lenin in his room, leading to a nickname of Red Rupe. Oh, going back a ways there. I was interested in your quote from ex-chair of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, about the Hamas attacks being the equivalent of 40,000 US citizens being killed in the atrocity. If you extrapolate that out to the Palestinian casualties, that's the equivalent of 7 million, Jack. So that's a point well made too. He goes on to say, Wait a moment. I don't see young people being concerned about loss of life on that scale as a bad thing. The only thing for certain is the people in charge perpetuating this conflict on both sides will be a long time in their graves, while the children of the Middle East, Israel and the US will be suffering from the radicalising effect for another century. He goes on to talk about, go ahead, Jack. He goes on to talk about another thing we discussed, and we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, always good to hear from Lawrence. I just make one comment about the student. Well, it's called, the papers have been calling it the student debt relief. No debt's ever cancelled. All that happens is the taxpayer's part rather than the person.
But it's a reduction in interest rates, and that's the point we needed to clarify. That's okay. He goes on to say, finally, a bit of feedback referring to your recent Black Label edition. Oh, this is a condition, but we did mention it on this program, Jack, or I did. This is the seaweed extract to reduce methane emissions among cattle. And I sort of was at a bit of a loss to understand why that wasn't going very well. He makes the point, and he would know. I'm not a cattle farmer. Lawrence is. He says it is yet to be commercially released. The initial lab work was very positive. However, larger scale feedlot trials are yet to show the same benefit. There has been a reduction in methane production, but nowhere near what was thought to be achievable, and it led to a reduction in weight gain. As of yet, it has only been trialled in feedlots because of the difficulty in finding a delivery system suitable for extensive grazing systems. That's something Lawrence most certainly knows. So that's
we were talking about this
too.
We did talk about this because I've been surprised to find how much cattle farming there is, say, in places like Central Florida, and they were using various methods to reduce methane there, including the seaweed things going on all around the world. But it may be possible to do this in feedlots, but it's a little bit hard to see how they're going to be able to do it in a place like Australia, where most of the cattle are raised on the range, as the Americans would say.
Oh, well, look, I don't want to talk too much about cattle farming like I know, Jack, because I'm not a cattle farmer, but we do know that a number of cattle are sent to feedlots to add weight before slaughter. But look, very good stuff from Lawrence. We appreciate it. We're always open to criticism, and certainly when we do get things wrong, it's important to clarify. So thank you, Lawrence, and I hope you're listening in today. We want to move now on to the UK, Jack. Election on July 4, Independence Day for the Americans, and it might well be an Independence Day of a kind for the people of the United Kingdom. The announcement was made by Rishi Sunak. It was just unbelievable. He stood out in front of the pelting rain, soaked Savile Row suit, $3,000 down the drain there, and
£4,000 his suits cost.
Oh yes, absolutely. I do. Thank you for that correction. And announced that there was going to be an election. The number 10 cat, Larry, who has his own Twitter account, said he would never go out in that kind of rain, and he thinks anyone who would is an idiot. Other people on Twitter, my favourite one was, we have a plan for an umbrella. What he got there. But, of course, the headline thing since, Jack, has been the compulsory national service for 18-year-olds. Now, if you're going to... we know they're not travelling all that well, the Tories. We know they expect to be thumped. I don't understand the rationale for this. What is Sunak trying to do with this announcement? And it seems to have been done on the back of an envelope, because most cabinet members said that it wasn't run past them. A defence minister, or the assistant defence minister, had 2 days earlier said, no, there's no prospect of national conscription. And then Sunak announces it. What's he up to?
Lord knows. I mean, it was a quite extraordinary thing. I couldn't find much sense in it at all.
The military are up in arms. Jeez, the last thing they need is a bunch of 18-year-olds coming off the pingers to join up with the military.
Well, the military never liked national service.
It's kind of a babysitting service. And it diminishes your strategic and tactical power. Just so people will understand what's going on, the Conservatives have pledged that if they win the general election, 18-year-olds will have to take part in a scheme involving military or civilian services. Speaking to reporters at a campaign event in Buckinghamshire, Mr. Sunak said, the modern form of national service will mean that young people get the skills and the opportunities they need, which is going to serve them very well in life. It is going to foster a culture of service, which is going to be incredibly powerful for making our society more cohesive, blah, 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 blah. This is all filmed on TikTok, Jack. They're on TikTok, the Tories, which is very amusing in itself. What is he up to here? There's two possibilities, two logical possibilities. One is that the national political conversation is so dire for the Tories, and we know it is, that he's trying to cause a distraction. Everybody look over here. And I guess the only other one is that he's appealing to what would be a fairly, well, I guess he's appealing to the Conservative base in many ways. It's one of those two things. Otherwise, it makes no sense whatsoever. The third possibility is that he's looked at things and gone, well, I think we might only win 50 seats, but I'd prefer to see the whole thing blown up.
It's hard to know why he's doing this, to be quite honest.
It's the dumbest thing I've come across in a long time, Jack.
As to appealing to the Tory base, I think that his big problem is that he's lost touch with the Tory vote.
Yeah. Maybe it's a form of distraction.
This is not an election where Labor are going to storm to power because people see them as better or because they're popular. They're not. This is an election that the Tories will have lost.
Well, I think talking to some of my British friends, I think there is a sense that there will be a new optimism arise from an election because these guys have been in power for a long time. They've had two purges just in the last 5 years, two party purges within the Conservative Party. It's been a complete and utter disaster. You've got Liz Truss running around there flogging her book, who's as mad as a hatter. But just wanted to get back to this. Defence Personnel Minister Andrew Morrison warned of a hit to morale, headcount and resources if potentially unwilling national service recruits were introduced alongside Britain's professional armed forces. When we talk about conscription, Jack, of course, there's a penalty if you don't attend, if you don't participate. And a number of Sunak's ministers had to come forward very hastily and go, "Oh, we're not going to put anyone in jail if they don't turn up." But they've admitted since that there will be sanctions. They just haven't figured out what they are yet. You really do get the sense that this was just made.
So it's going to be voluntary, sort of a compulsory voluntary national service.
There will be sanctions. We're just not letting you know what they will be.
Yeah,
this is Admiral, and this is his response. Admiral Alan West, former chief of the Naval Staff, said it was a bonkers plan. Lovely English word that. I'm delighted if more young people become aware of defence and are involved, but this idea is basically bonkers, he said. We need to spend more on defence, and by doing what he's suggesting, money will be sucked out of defence. They've put aside £2.5 billion for this, Jack.
Yeah.
But that seemed to be, that is, according to a lot of specialists or experts, saying nowhere near enough.
I saw this from a despairing British voter, unhappy with either alternative. Replacing Rishi Sunak with Keir Starmer is like being a kid in hospital in the 70s and being told that the Jimmy Savile visit is cancelled, but then hearing the sound of a didgeridoo coming down the corridor.
Yeah, okay. So we got a bit of both sidism there, but this, I think this. This is basically, I mean, if it was their intention, it will certainly come about that they'll be blown off the map. Have you had a look at some of the senior figures within Sunak's government, Jack, and what chances they have? I had a look at, well, he's no longer a significant figure. Sunak had about 71% of the vote. Up in York, I should say. Suella Braverman looks pretty safe. Who knows? I mean, if we're sort of looking at sort of 20-25% swings, I mean, everyone's up for grabs. But Mr. Rees-Mogg, Jack, seems to be the one who's probably, he had 50% of the vote at the last election, which the Tories won fairly significantly. Mr. Rees-Mogg may be looking down the barrel of a loss.
Yes, he could be back being an investment banker.
Yes, I don't think it's going to affect his wealth all that much. Labor questioned how the Ministry of Defence would fund 30,000 places. That's essentially the number of 18-year-olds in the UK at any given time, 30,000 places. And they have a national citizen service thing, Jack, which Mr. Sunak, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, had defunded. So they actually had something in place which he cut, well, not defunded, but cut the funding of. It's just a staggering thing. I thought when I first heard it, I thought these guys are intent on losing every single seat they've got.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen there, Jack? It looks to me like Labor will have sort of 400 plus, maybe seats in the Commons, and it will be the SLs will be the opposition.
It is hard to say. I don't think the loss will be quite that bad, but they will win and win comfortably.
Yeah. Well, I was going to go on and say, what happens if the Tories are reduced to a rump? Do they succeed, or do they press on, or are they done?
Well, I don't think that matters a great deal. Probably they press on because they've got the infrastructure, but it will profoundly change. It would profoundly change whichever party loses.
That's what I mean. It's going to be a very significant change to the political landscape in the UK. Over now to Gaza, it looks like the Rafah operation is going ahead. No boots on the ground yet, but there was an attack on a refugee camp where there were a reported 30 dead. The IDF explained that it was doing this because they had intelligence that led them to believe that there were a number of Hamas individuals there, significant individuals there. But of course, the headlines sort of talk about refugees being destroyed, being killed in their camps. It does look like it's going to go ahead, but there clearly has been a lot of discussion between the Israeli government and the American government, Jack, on how the invasion of Rafah will look.
Yes, so it would seem.
So what have the Israelis told them? They've obviously got a plan for an for an entry and then an exit. They've been able to satisfy the Americans along those lines.
Yeah, I don't think they've shifted their view that they should go ahead and do it at all.
I don't think they've shifted their view, but they've shifted their tactics and strategy too.
Perhaps they have.
Yeah.
This is the sort of thing that they're not going to tell us. We'll find out when it starts happening.
Well, there was initially reporting from the Biden administration. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken reported that Israel had no credible plan. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan added, "We still believe it would be a mistake to launch a major military operation into the heart of Rafah." But now, as of last week, the administration sort of claimed credit for a bit of a shift there. It's fair to say that the Israelis have updated their plans. They've incorporated many of the concerns that we have expressed. This is a senior US official. He also said that the Rafah operation might create opportunities for getting the hostage deal back on track. But it's not being well received, Jack, and this is something that you wanted to talk about today. We don't have a lot of polling around this, but there is polling around the world that sort of indicates that Israel is losing support around the West.
Not in the United States, but elsewhere that's true.
Right. So Harvard-Harris poll in the US said that 2/3 of Americans say ceasefire only on release of hostages and removal of Hamas. A YouGov poll commissioned by the Medical Aid for Palestinians and the Council for Arab-British Understanding has shown that the majority of British people think there should be an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and would support the UK ending its arms sales to Israel. 55% of people support the UK ending the sale of arms to Israel. And then we've got similar sorts of sentiments being expressed in polling around the world: China, South Africa, Brazil, Latin America.
Yeah. In the US, 70% of the polls, of the Harvard-Harris poll, were in favour of doing the Rafah operation, 70%. So US has become a bit of an outlier. There's no polling in Australia that I could find.
There isn't.
But certainly not
around Rafah, and really not very much Europe at all around the whole Gaza response to the October 7 outrages. There haven't been much at all. I suspect we would find that we wouldn't have the same support that exists in the polling done in the United States.
Quite probably.
quite probably. So we will have to see how this all plays out. I said last week, I don't think the world can handle another sort of Rafah turning into another Gaza City, particularly given that people were told to go and find refuge there. So if it's a boots on the ground sort of operation, we'll know. If it's going to be airstrikes and artillery, we'll know. We'll just have to watch. But it seemed to kick off yesterday, didn't it?
And it isn't clear how many of the civilians from Rafah have evacuated.
Yeah, well, that's not good news, is it, Jack?
Well, the Wall Street Journal thinks nearly 1 million of them have, but we don't really know the answer to that.
Did they say whether those were Gaza City residents who had found refuge in Rafah and then moved on?
There's no reporting on that.
Yeah. My understanding is there are almost 2 million people there. But anyway, we will report back on this next week. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what Julia Gillard has said. It's been reported in The Australian this morning. She appears on a Josh Frydenberg special for Sky News about anti-Semitism, the rise of anti-Semitism in Australia. And the former PM said in interview, "It worries me that people get their understanding of history off social media without ever touching any of the real facts. I think a lot of what is going on today is a distortion of history from social media. It's a misunderstanding about how Israel came into existence. It is a misunderstanding about the nature of the conflict." But certainly I'd agree with all of that. And because of that, I think particularly young people are developing views about this which are unbalanced and really not informed by the history in any way. So if we can find a way of getting better education, a better understanding about what is going on and the pathways to peace, we'll be in a much better place than we are now. She went on to say that she was particularly alarmed by what she saw and what we have seen in this country as a sort of rise of anti-Semitism. Sensible work. She very rarely comes out, Jack. As you know, she doesn't, like some of our former political leaders, offer running commentary on a whole host of events. So I think it was significant that she's come forward to do this.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I mean, she's very sensibly takes the view that having played her role in politics and finished, that she should move on and do other things. But this is an indication that she takes it quite seriously. I think Josh Frydenberg's on a bit of a wrong track with this. He's talking about the dreaded Section 18C of the Discrimination Act, which makes it unlawful to do an act in public if the act is reasonably likely to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate a person or group of people, etc., etc.
Right.
The difficulty with 18C is we have no right, nor should we, not to be offended, insulted or humiliated. You know, that's just part of life.
Yeah.
And that should come out of 18C, in my view. And Josh Frydenberg wants to stop people saying that I don't think Israel should exist. Now, to me, that's a political point of view. It's not one that I agree with, but it's a political point of view. I would rather they said that out loud than to hide it behind a chant like "from the river to the sea," which means exactly the same thing.
From the river to the sea, the opposition has announced that they would effectively deport any foreign students who were caught making that chant.
Well, that's just wrong.
It is crazy, isn't it? It is just the wrong way to deal with this. And I actually really enjoyed hearing your words there. That I think where you've got protests, people are going to be raucous. They're going to say things that will be offensive. I think we have to cope with that. What we don't want to see is, the things that would alarm me is where we see perhaps groups within the left aligning with extreme right groups, surreptitiously and promoting an anti-Semitic agenda that way. I haven't seen any evidence of that. But the hard right is watching all of this very, very carefully, and we always should be on our toes about these things. But I really respect what you just said there. You cannot criminalise what is essentially an expression of political speech.
No, I don't think you should. In some parts of the world they do, but
it's not as if it's impossible to do it, physically impossible to do it. It gets done all over the world, but it's not something that we should seek here. Yeah.
Yeah, and getting back to Lawrence earlier on, Lawrence, trust me, I absolutely defend the rights of particularly university students to hold the most ridiculous opinions. Because I did myself.
Me too. We've all been there and we've done it.
I kind of shudder with embarrassment when I think back to some of the things that I thought when I was that age. But that's fine. I got no problem with people doing that.
That's fine.
And the answer for Josh Frydenberg is to do what Julia Gillard did and defend Israel's right to exist.
And call out anti-Semitism. That's the other point that she made, that people should call it out every time they see it.
Yeah.
And I think that's another really significant point. So well done you, Jack, and well done to the former Prime Minister Julia Gillard. AI, Jack, move fast and break things. That's what Mark Zuckerberg said, and that seems to be what's happening with the development of AI, Jack.
I love this story about what's her name? Scarlett Johansson.
Who's very bright. I think psychology degree and all that. I mean, she's super smart.
Yeah. She's not just a good actress and cute. She's bright. Yeah. One of the AI companies wanted her to be a voice. Or to be the basis for a voice that they were using to provide a service to people.
This is happening pretty widely. So what you do for your AI, you will say, can you read out the Declaration of Independence in Scarlett Johansson's voice?
Yeah,
and you will get that.
And it would do that. And she had done a movie, I think the movie's called Her or something, in which she plays a kind of she provides the voice for an AI type thing, and they thought it went very well. She's got a great voice. She said no after some thought, and probably after looking at how many zeros are going to be on the check, and she said no. And she says they went ahead and used her voice anyway.
It's a really interesting legal point, though, Jack, because it might have been someone that they've grabbed out of the blue, a voiceover artist who sounds a bit like Scarlett Johansson.
It could be. I always thought that you could have been a voice doppelganger for Bob Carr myself.
Look, I actually met Bob, and it was a slightly embarrassing meeting. I met Bob some time ago. I was with Meredith Bergman, and Meredith introduced me, and I was wearing a badge that said Jack Hoisted, and I introduced myself as Peter, and he looked at me as like, this guy could be an assassin or a troublemaker anyway, and he's very tall. He's not taller than I am, and I'm 6'1", and he was sort of looking down at me going, who the bloody hell is this? Yes, that's just a nice deep voice. So look, AI's got lots of challenges for our community, and IP will be one of them. One imagines.
Yeah. It's gonna be a lawyer fest. Interesting thing that comes out of this, though, is that I hadn't realised until a couple of days ago just how energy intensive AI is.
Yeah.
That a single AI chip burns through as much energy as 3 EVs.
Yeah, and they burn through a fair bit.
Yeah.
Well, that takes us to energy, Jack, and
this is the thing. They did a survey of the 10 busiest power utilities in the US, and 9 of them are ramping up their production capacity because of data centers, because of AI type things. You know?
Big data centers, we say, Jack. Always data, but I know Google's data center is self-powered, what's supposed to be. but they are.
It's probably powered by the good thoughts of the Google people who work there.
It's every 3 o'clock they'll sit on beanbags and think nice things, and that's what powers it. But yes, these huge data centres, and there'll be material stored by Google. There'll be material by all of the major telcos, plus government, and just to give you an idea. Power use from thousands of giant computing warehouses that comprise data centres is expected to triple globally from less than 15 terawatt hours in 2023 to 46 terawatt hours this year. So these things are expanding and sucking up a lot of energy. And if you're burning coal, you're shoveling coal into the furnace to get this happening. It is causing all sorts of planetary problems.
Yeah, well, the figures kind of staggered me, I must say, and I just think it's going to. An AI is going to happen, and it's going to happen on scale. So this is another factor to think about.
There are virtually no legislative restraints. I mean, I think if you sat down your average congressman, or indeed your average politician or parliamentarian in Australia, federal parliamentarian, and talked to them about AI, most of them wouldn't have a clue what's going on.
Yes.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Jack, in proper media, mainstream media, just a couple of little facts there. The median age, the average age, or median average, we'll say it's the same thing. The median age of an MSNBC viewer is 70 years of age. That's the average. So there's a couple there knocking up tons that might be still watching as well. Fox News is 69. And MTV, the average or median age of an MTV viewer is 51 years of age, Jack. I mean, that's a staggering sort of figure, isn't it, in terms of the influence, perhaps not so much in MTV, in terms of the influence that some of the networks have. MSNBC, very much dedicated left, Democrat, and Fox News, probably more Republican, quite critical of Trump at the moment too. But these are oldies watching it, Jack.
Yeah, I would have thought it's an indication of the lack of influence of MSNBC and probably Fox.
Yeah, exactly right.
But I did come up with an explanation. I don't know whether you've watched much MSNBC or Fox, but on trips
try to watch as little as possible, but I know what's going on there.
On trips to the United States, I've watched a fair bit of them, because they're always on the, if you go to the gym or you're in your hotel room, and they're very, very shouty. Both of these things.
Yeah. It's all about the panel shows, and creating a bit of fear. And it's not just Fox News, MSNBC do it as well.
Oh, yeah. MSNBC is even more shouty than Fox. MSNBC's business model is 5 people shouting at each other. And I think that the reason they're attracting 70-year-olds is because the 70-year-olds don't hear so well. So,
maybe that's it. Yeah, but it does speak to influence of media. I mean, basically, you're talking about the most influential things that are particularly around young voters. It's going to be Facebook, Instagram, those sorts of things.
Well, not Facebook. I think Facebook's for old people these days.
Still using it, but Insta will be the one that determines. And most people stream TV these days too. So when they are sitting there watching TV, they're not flipping to. Well, you can stream live TV, of course, but they're not flipping around to news networks and political analysis, which is the sort of stock in trade for those sort of networks. All right, Indian election, Jack, a massive logistical exercise kicked off about 6 weeks ago, and in 7 phases to elect all 543 members of the Lok Sabha, which is their parliament. The votes will be counted and results will be declared on the 4th of June. Largest ever election in history. Approximately, well, they say approximately, but it could be as many as 970 million voters. That's the number of eligible voters, 970 million people. And Article 83 of the Constitution of India requires elections to the Lok Sabha to be held once every 5 years. Major exercise. Are you making a tip, or you just want to comment on just how this exercise in democracy takes place, Jack.
Yeah, well, the 7 phases are different geographical areas. So
Yes.
the last area votes on Saturday, I think, and then they start counting the votes.
That's right. So the count takes a couple of weeks. Well,
Yeah.
maybe not a couple of weeks, but the count starts on the 4th. And I think that's supposed to go for, well, at least a week.
Yeah.
Votes will be counted on the 4th of June.
It looks like probably Modi's party, the Hindu nationalist BJP, will get back in, but there's a fair bit of guesswork involved in that.
Only a little bit, mate. Only 970 million votes to count. So going to be a fair amount of guesswork there. It's going to be very interesting to see if Modi is re-elected. I suspect that will happen, and that may not necessarily be a good thing for India. But we'll keep an eye on that. Ooh, what are we talking about? Well, we'll probably get to it in 2 weeks' time and declare the result then. Jack, has your garden? Well, you don't garden. Let's get that out there early. I don't think you've mowed a lawn since you're about 8.
No, that's not quite true.
Haven't pulled a weed since you're about 6.
I sold the Victor when I moved down to Melbourne to go to law school, and it was about 1981. And I had a push mower after that for my little courtyard. But no, I've been in Hong Kong for nearly 16 years, and I've not gardened in that entire time.
Yeah, you're missing out. You're missing
living in
out
an apartment.
watching wonderful things grow.
Yeah. I've been
just
watching.
planted some potatoes. Just so you know, I just planted some potatoes in my pots. Well, not pots. They're great big potting. God, I can't even think of the name of them. Bloody enormous they are. Anyway, is your garden racist? I think this is a theme that's being explored. Where did you get this from? Is this BBC? This is from the B.
I think it was from the BBC, but it comes from the UK, where there's considerable concern that you can have a thing called horticultural appropriation, and that it is wrong to plant things that come from somewhere else. That if you're appropriating the culture of someone, right? So this can be a mistake. So I think you should do an audit of your garden to make sure there's no rhododendrons, azaleas, daffodils, tulips,
willow
jacarandas,
trees, for example.
agapanthus,
The willow tree,
hydrangeas.
the wind blew that over, so that was there when we got here. But I don't see much point in having willow trees. One of the things around the Southern Highlands is that you do have a lot of willows. You do have a lot of deciduous trees around the place that clearly have been planted from Europe to give people a bit of a sense of what they used to see. So it's actually quite lovely in autumn because there are this sort of mix of colours.
It also suits the climate up there.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, so if you play at the local golf course, it's actually a lovely thing. They've just got a whole range of North American maples and willows from the UK and Europe and so forth. It's actually a beautiful thing, along with a hell of a lot of gum trees, and it doesn't. It's actually quite lovely to walk around, particularly in autumn.
Anyway, the activists in the UK would now call that horticultural appropriation because those plants were brought back to the UK, or in this case, brought to the Southern Highlands as a result of colonialism. Yes.
There you go. There you go. What would be the punishment for that, Jack? Just let the weeds grow?
I think so. Yeah.
And knock them out. Very, very weird. United States, Jack. Well, we'll just kick it off first. Probably sometime this week we will have a decision on a verdict, indeed, on the Trump New York case. I think closing arguments will be made tomorrow, and then the jury will retire. Well, tomorrow, perhaps almost Wednesday our time, and then the jury will retire, and we'll give them a couple of days. So maybe by the end of this week or early next, we'll know if Donald Trump will be a convict or not. there is no prospect that he would be handcuffed and dragged away to what's the slammer in New York? It's the Metropolitan.
Rikers Island.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's Rikers, of course, but there's also that horrendous one where the celebrity pedophile hanged himself.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, Jeffrey Epstein, which looks like a multi-story disgrace. But no prospect of that occurring, and almost certainly will be appeal in the event where Trump is convicted. And he'll essentially just wander off and continue his campaigning as a convicted man, if that is indeed what happens. The other thing, I don't know if you saw it, Jack. Did you see his appearance before the Libertarian Convention on the weekend?
Well, I saw a clip of it. Yes,
it's all very shouty, wasn't it?
It was.
He did say you got to take your hat off to him for this one. He goes, "Well, you can be a winner with me," which is arguable, or you can get 3% every 4 years like you've been doing.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff.
That's the sort of argument that Gough Whitlam used to make to the socialist left.
That's right. The Libertarians are a bit nuts. You might remember the guy who started the Silk Road.
A bit nuts?
Hey?
A bit nuts?
It's the laziest form of ideology you can think of. That is basically just like, I just want to do whatever I want to do, whatever I feel like. But one of the things, Trump actually said that he would consider pardoning this fellow. He was the guy who created the dark web Silk Road, where you could buy almost anything, including firearms, drugs, etc. And then he was ultimately charged with organising the murders of 6 people, and the Libertarians want this man pardoned and released from prison. And Trump sort of gave him a bit of a nod, said he'd think about it. That's just nuts to me. I know that case very well, and it's just insane to even think about releasing this guy. It's a terrible piece of work.
It's just a shame that Trump's not being tried in Illinois and Chicago, because they've just passed a bill there that has replaced the word offender with a new term, a justice impact individual. So that Trump would not be an offender.
Can't call him a convict.
Charged.
Couldn't call him a convict in Illinois.
He would be a justice impact individual.
Just so we get into the vagaries of law here, if convicted, he would be convicted of E-class felonies, which are the very lowest form of felonies that you can be convicted of in the state of New York. And as I said before, no prospect of any prison sentence. In fact, he would be free to leave under his bail terms if he is convicted, and there would be a sentencing hearing organised in some weeks or months ahead. The appeal is likely to push all this stuff into 2025 anyway. But has he finally found a vice presidential pick, you think, Jack, or is Tom Cotton of Arkansas? Has he shot a dog or done anything disgraceful recently?
Well, there's continuing discussions about this. There's a few names that have been tossed around. Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, and some senators, Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, and the very odd J.D. Vance of Ohio.
He's a very strange human being.
Yeah, Tom Cotton seems to be the most talk about him. He's I suppose, fairly typical United States politician, Harvard law, a bit of military service,
But why him? Why Tom Cotton of Arkansas?
He actually presents pretty well. He's I think he wouldn't be a bad campaigner.
All right. Look,
but who knows? But I just thought it was, there's.
Oh well, we've got to update these things, and
yeah.
Look, it looks like, for our listeners, we would like it to be that we've at least discussed some of the prospects, so we don't go, who's that guy? Who's he just chosen? we've been mentioning this a fair bit during the day. Protests at expensive colleges, Jack.
They did a survey on where the protests, and particularly because these are the Gaza protests, and particularly the encampments, which colleges are they taking place at in the United States? And they mapped them against the expense of going to the college and the difficulty of getting in, right? So the more exclusive the college and the more expensive it was to go. And that's where all the protests are.
So more exclusive, more expensive is where the more passionate protests are occurring on university campuses.
Whereas the pay your own way community college, all that sort of stuff, they don't have any.
What about the black colleges in the United States, Jack? How do they feature?
They're not big on it either.
Okay. All right. Well,
these are the HBCUs, as they're called, the historically black colleges. None of them are exclusively black, I don't think, anymore. But
not anymore. But yeah, that's right. All right. My favourite segment of the week, sport. AFL, Jack. We don't really need to go through the wins and losses last week. All kind of predictable. There were a couple of odd choices, but I just wanted to go through some of the Brownlow probabilities. If you stop the Brownlow count as of last week, Isaac Heaney would probably win by the length of the straight, wouldn't he, from the Swans?
You'd be a long way in front.
I think there was some analysis done, and on basically statistical data, and Heaney, Patrick Cripps from Carlton, Labont from Western Bulldogs, and Zach Merritt, who's you probably would have got him to win the Brownlow at about 500 to 1 at the start of the season. He's had a hell of a good season.
You wouldn't be getting 500s now, I can tell you.
No, definitely not. He's moved up into the, I think, about fourth or fifth line of betting. But Isaac Heaney, I think the one thing that would stop Isaac winning the Brownlow is that there are a lot of very good footballers, his teammates, who are pinching votes from him.
Champion Data do this. Their top 50 players,
right?
And for the first time ever, a team has 5 in the top 50, and that's the Swans.
One of those is Chad Warner, Jack, who has put his contract negotiations aside.
He is contractually end of next year, so it's not one of those urgent ones.
I'd have to check, and please don't quote me, but I have a feeling he might be up for restricted free trade or restricted free agent.
At the end of 25, yes.
At the end of 2025, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I just know that there's a bit of talk, media talk really, in AFL, which is often a bit of rubbish, but the Carlton was sort of looking at him and going, "Oh, he'd be good." He's had a hell of a good season, and of course, Blakey has too.
Blakey's not in the top 5. The top 5. Top 5 for Champion Data were Goulden, Heaney, Warner, Rowbottom, and Ollie Florent.
Yeah. No, they're their major movers.
What did Jerry Waitley say on yesterday? At the start of the year, I thought Goulden was their best player. 6 weeks ago, I thought Heaney was easily their best player. And as of this weekend, I think Warner's their best player.
It's a season really so far of form. And how just form can drop off a little bit, and they're the only ones who really haven't dropped off. I mean, they only lost one game, and that was to Richmond, so that was an anomaly.
Mind you, the Bulldogs were a bit stiff on the last week. The Bulldogs, I think, this time last year, I think Carlton were on 4 wins. Right, ended up playing at preliminary. Carlton and the Giants were both on 4 wins this time last year. Ended up playing in preliminary finals.
Well, speaking of the Giants, I didn't realise, but they've actually dominated Geelong in Geelong. I think they've had 4 wins there in a row, and they had a win, a last breath win there. And the Cats have just dropped off in form a little bit, really driven by their midfield. The Cats, so Carlton play Essendon in 2 weeks' time. So that will mean if both Mackays stay fit, Jack, that 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 the brothers will possibly play on each other for the first time in their AFL careers.
Yeah.
Either one or the other's been out injured along the way.
There's been a little bit of fun on Twitter between them about that.
Yeah.
I just say from the last weekend's results, the team to watch, I thought, out of that was the Western Bulldogs. They were a bit stiff to lose to Sydney, and that's the benchmark at the moment. So they look better of the sides who were down that 4 or 5 wins level.
They're out of the 8, and they're. I think they've only had the 5 wins. Their best football's very good.
Yeah.
But they don't find it often enough, I'd say, about the Western Bulldogs. And there are some issues, continual sort of babbling about the coach and whether he's gone on too long there. Meanwhile, Jack, in the NRL, the State of Origin squads have been announced. Billy Slater, who's been a very successful State of Origin coach, has left out David Fafita, which is said to be a bit controversial. But the one with all the pressure on them is the Blues outfit, and they left out James Tedesco, Jack.
They did,
opting for the Penrith fullback instead of James Tedesco, who's superstar of the game. So that's going to be very interesting to watch. But I fear again it will be a Maroons flogging. We will see. In cricket, well, we'll just kick off with the IPL final. Everyone was saying whether Mitchell Starc was worth his $4.4 million salary in the IPL, and I think the answer is yes now, after he bowled an absolute blinder to take the first wicket, an absolute ripper, and only took the 2 wickets, but made some inroads into Hyderabad's batting, and they were all out for 113, and the final was over fairly quickly thereafter. So Starkey showed exactly why he's one of the best bowlers in the world and worth his dough. He has a very good record against Travis Head, who was out first ball, but not to Mitchell Starc in the IPL final. Got a really good record against him. Obviously, a bit going on in the nets there too between Travis Head, who's been, I think he's got an average of 40 for the tournament at around about 220 run rate. Scoring at more than 2 a ball.
Not such a good end to the season for Travis Head. He's a couple of ducks in a row, I think, towards the end.
Done very, very well throughout the season, and will be in really good nick because on Sunday, Jack, and like the Indian squad and all those from other parts of the cricketing world who have played in the IPL, they'll be raring to go and in really good nick. I imagine that's why India are favourites. But the T20 World Cup kicks off on Sunday night in the West Indies. I think the first game is, I'll just have a quick look. The first game is Canada versus the United States of America, Jack.
Mm. I read somewhere the other day, I'm not sure this is true, that Mitchell Starc hasn't played in a losing final in a short form cricket.
Oh, is that right?
You can check that for me because I thought you'd know, but that was something that's...
There's a lot of cricket in there. If we're talking about 50-over cricket, World Cup finals, those sorts of things, there's a lot of opportunities. And look, Australia haven't lost much in the last 3 or 4 years, but he's been around a lot longer than that. I mean, he has that ability to take a wicket with the new ball, to beat the best batsman in the world, knock him over, hit the top of off, all that sort of stuff. But look, I just wanted to draw our listeners' attention to the T20 World Cup. First thing I'd have to say is that most of these games are on in horrific hours. Most of them very late at night or early in the morning because of the location, of course. So it's going to be tough watching. Some of the games we'll have to be watching while we're working. But there are 4 groups, and and some of the minnows are representative qualified. So, as I said, Canada and the United States have qualified in Group A, India and Pakistan in Group A, along with Ireland. Australia and England are in Group B, along with Namibia, Oman and Scotland. Group C, which is really interesting, that's Afghanistan, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, first time participants in an ICC World Cup of any stripe. So you've got Afghanistan, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Uganda and the West Indies. So Afghanistan, New Zealand and the West Indies, you would think New Zealand will hit the top of that group, but then it'll be between Afghanistan and the host nation, host group of nations to see who progresses. And finally, in Group D, it's Bangladesh, Nepal, the Netherlands, South Africa and Sri Lanka. Well, you would imagine Sri Lanka and South Africa would go through there, but you never know with Bangladesh. I think the C group is really one where the West Indies will have to play well to beat Afghanistan.
Yes, you would think so.
And we hope so. We hope that that's the case because West Indies cricket needs a little bit of a boost, needs a little bit of a boost to get it back to its halcyon days. And in rugby, Jack, it's I do. We did, of course, see Man United come from nowhere to beat Man City for the FA Cup.
We did.
Man United have been going fairly ordinarily this season. And there was some talk about whether they'd even bother showing up. They'd get beaten that badly. But it would seem like the Man City boys were still on the booze.
And there's plenty of pundits saying that it shows again that on the big stage, in the big moments, Haaland doesn't always.
Hasn't kicked a goal in a final. Is that right, Jack?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So they got beaten, much to the amusement of Man United followers all over the place. There's a bit of a contretemps between Noel Gallagher and the Man United. He's a commentator now. Man United.
Gary Neville.
Yeah. They had a bit of a Barney, and Neville said, "Well, you don't even live in Manchester, mate. You live in London. You only come up here once a year," which was a bit of a needle. I kind of like that stuff. And finally, Jack, the rugby. We go into the Super Rugby finals. They have a season and then they stop it, and then they have these kind of playoffs.
They've changed the rules for the finals. All 12 teams are now going to be eligible for the finals rather than just the leading 8.
Yeah.
And they're going to start again, basically.
So why do we have the season? Why do we?
You'd sort of wonder, wouldn't you? Yeah.
It's a bit silly. But they're just trying things, and that's fair enough.
Look, it's a farce. It's sort of a who cares. But they play far too many times against each other. So, you can remember when a Waratahs Reds game or a Waratahs Brumbies game was a treat because there was just one or two a season.
Play each other for every 3 weeks now.
Yeah, and now it takes all of the oomph out of it. If you want to look at a successful rugby comp around the world, look at things like the Six Nations where you just get one crack at somebody who you really want to beat.
It does surprise me. I looked at the breakdown. It's 1v8, 2v8. But basically it's like you're having a season that's almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
And then you have your playoffs at the end of it. So couldn't quite figure that out. All right, well, that takes us out of the world of sport. What do you got for me to take us out, Jack?
A little Japanese town from where you get a great view of Mount Fuji.
I saw this. Yeah, go on.
And of course, the Instagram has changed the way people travel. They love to go to places where other people have taken photos and posted them on Instagram and do the same thing. And they were leaving a bit of rubbish around the streets and doing all those sorts of things the Japanese don't really like. So this little town has said, well, we'll do without the tourists. So they've erected a 20-foot 20 metre high black wall, basically to chain mesh fence with black tape on it, so that the people can't take the photos. So
Well, they can't see Fuji, Jack. I mean,
They
that's
can't see
basically.
Fuji.
I mean, it is a kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face sort of exercise.
yes, it is.
then-
We're wondering here whether we should do it at what we call the Wall of Death, which is the wall in Graham Street near my local, where the Korean Korean girl tourists have their photos taken. And it's quite a steep hill, Graham Street. So the taxi drivers, when they turn up Graham Street, you have to commit. You've got to put your foot down and mean it. Yeah, and these they love to have a photo where they're walking away, a video where they're walking away from the wall. So it's almost become a sport watching them dodge the taxis as they come up.
Bring out the high fence and the black tarp, Jack. But look, I mean, I understand what this village is doing, because people just come there and just drop litter and behave disgracefully and all that sort of stuff. And fair enough.
And the Japanese don't like that.
Don't like it.
Anyway, just before we go, the best thing I read all week: transgender people. They are just not what they were.
Oh, Jack. That'll bring complaints.
Good.
It's just a logical statement. I get that. But anyway, I'm not even going to touch it. We're going to move on, and we're going to wrap this episode up. It is episode 75. We look forward to bringing you episode 76 next week. In the meantime, be like our good farmer mate Lawrence and drop us a line if you've got any comments, criticisms, etc. You can get me on at Jack the Insider. DMs are always open. And Jack, you can hit up Hong Kong Jack on his what is it called?
Substack. HongKongJack.substack.com.
You can do that too. All right. Well, that takes us out for episode 75. 75. I was going to say 1975. It takes us out for episode 75, and we look forward to bringing you episode 76 next week. See you, folks. Bye.